Ruth the Moabite, an unlikely hero. That's my title today. Ruth the Moabite is a fascinating character. She's one of those biblical characters that kind of defies definition. But the reason she is so important is because she is the founding matriarch of the Davidic royal family. And that's not an insignificant role. Ruth the Moabite is one of the most significant women in Jewish history. And the question is, why, if she is such a significant woman, don't we understand more about her? We have one story in Tanakh about Ruth. It's contained in the book of Ruth. In fact, she has an entire book devoted to her, but we don't know much about her, which must mean one of two things. The first is that what we don't know about her, we don't need to know about her. And what we do know about her is extremely significant. And what I'd like to do today is build a bit of a backdrop. You know, that every story has a backstory. And even if you don't know the story, the backstory from the story itself, very often, when you're informed of the details of the backstory, it gives the story itself much more significance. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. I want to talk about the significance of Ruth the Moabite in Jewish tradition and Jewish history, and at the same time understand the context in which she emerged and why indeed she is so important and what lessons we can learn from her. And after all, we read the story of Ruth the Moabite on Shavuot. What is the significance of Ruse the Moabite, the matriarch of the Davidic royal family? So, the first source I'm going to look at is a source in Ruse Rabbah. Ruse Rabbah is the Midrash on Ruse. And the question that the Midrash is dealing with, it comes at it from a kind of side angle, but in this extremely important question. There's lots of women in the Bible, in the Hebrew scriptures. Tremendous number of women. None of them have their own book. Let's take Miriam. Miriam is the sister of Moshe Rabbeinu. She's a very significant woman. I'm sure that many significant things happened to her besides for what we know about her from the Torah, but she doesn't have her own book. And there are other significant women. There's only two women who have their own book. One is called Esther. Well, when we get to Purim, we'll talk about her. And the other one is called Ruse. The question is, why does Ruse deserve her own book? That's really what the Midrash wants to address. I'm going to read you the Midrash. Amar Reb Zeira. Reb Zeira, his name was also Reb Zeira, was a significant Talmudic rabbi. And he says as follows about the book of Rus: Megillah zu ein ba loy tuma veloy tahara. This Megillas Rus, doesn't have any rules relating to purity or impurity. Veloy isur veloy heter, nor does it talk about any things which are either forbidden or allowed. Velama nichteva, in which case, why was it written? Why was this story recorded? Lelamedcha kama schar toiv legoimlei chasodim. The answer is, says Reb Zeira in this Midrash, to teach you the fundamental lesson of Megillas Rus is to teach you how great is the reward for those who do kindnesses. I'm going to come back to that. I think it's a tremendous answer. I mean, if it was just worth you logging into Zoom today to hear that, it was worth it. You can log off now. Don't, by the way, stay on. But if it was just worth it for that, it was worth it. Just to teach you an entire book of Tanakh, only written to teach you that there's a great reward for those who do kindnesses. I'm going to come back to that. I want to really address a question as to how Ruth the Moabite might have been perceived by the Jews living in her time. It's an important question, right? What would they have thought of Ruse? What, in fact, did they think of strangers? Now, I have to tell you, and we're going to get to this in a moment, that there was nothing worse in ancient history than being a stranger in a place where nobody knew who you were and nobody cared whether you lived or died. Now, it's bad enough if people know who you are and don't care if you live or die. But if they don't know who you are, they're certainly not going to care whether you live or die. And moreover, they're going to be extremely suspicious of you. Ancient history, and I'm not going to go into all the historical examples, I'm going to just give you some examples from Tanakh. But ancient history is littered with examples of people who suffered simply for being strangers in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm going to give you a quote from Mark Twain. Mark Twain was an extremely important American writer of the 19th century, and he wrote an autobiography. Not many people read it anymore. I have it, and it's full of pithy observations about life. He was a very sharp observer of human nature. And Mark Twain said as follows about how people judge others. He spoke about himself. I suspect he did so only to use himself as a foil. But this is what he said. Figures often beguile me, particularly when I have the arranging of them myself, in which case the remark attributed to Disraeli would often apply with justice and force. There are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. He's talking about how human nature tends to generalize about things that they know little about. So, whatever the case may be, when you look at a particular type of person, you're going to judge them on the basis of a statistical piece of information that you may have at the back of your mind about that person. Statistics are going to guide you. Statistics are going to illuminate your thinking. By the way, probably darken your thinking. Because as Disraeli said, there's no greater lie than a statistic. And you know the question. If I buy a winning lottery ticket and I've won the lottery, what are the chances of me winning the lottery again? Statistically, it's no different every single time I buy a lottery ticket. I have the same chance of winning as the last time I bought the lottery ticket. But in your mind, you think, if I've won it once, either you're going to think, if you're a gambler, you'll think, well, I'll probably win again. And if you're not a gambler, you'll think, I'll never win again. In other words, you'll base your judgment on what you think is the statistical chance, but actually, it has no relationship with reality. Similarly, people. So he used this analogy when he was trying to define those he came across in his many travels. Figures beguile me, he said. Statistics obviously beguiled him. Why? Because he had come across so many exceptions to the rules that he had been told to believe as he grew up and as he was an adult. Figures beguile him. What would statistics have determined with regard to Ruth the Moabite in the era in which she lived? So I would say this. Human beings are incapable of considering a stranger, somebody not of their own kind, objectively. We tend to generalize, and we assume that each individual from within any group reflects the general characteristics of that group. I mean, we're Jews, so we know that people consider us at the same time to be very stingy. Also, we must be very rich. Also, I was on a trip with Christians to Israel, and one of the pastors asked me, why is it that all Jews are rich? I said, would you mind if I gave you the number of my bank manager, because I'm just trying to arrange a big loan. Maybe if you tell him I'm rich, he'll believe you, and he's more likely to give me the loan. But that's a generalization that you as a Jew watching this Zoom shir are only too familiar with. But we're just as guilty as everyone else. We judge others who are different to us. We judge strangers who are different to us based on our generalized preconceptions about who they are and what they represent. We're all guilty of this attitude. We see any hint of group characteristics as absolute proof, incontrovertible proof of our assumptions. And the more hostile we feel towards the group from which the stranger comes, or the more hostile we feel that group's feelings are towards us, the more hostile the acts of individuals from that group are interpreted by us. Which brings me to what I mentioned earlier that I would reveal to you. What was the attitude in the era of the Bible, of Tanakh, towards strangers? It's a good question, right? I have to tell you, you don't have to wait very long to find out the answer to that question when you start reading at the beginning of Bereshis. What was the punishment for Cain? Cain and Hevel. Cain kills his brother Hevel. What was his punishment? Does anyone remember? Don't all shout out at once. It's a pasuk in the Torah. Right at the beginning of Bereshis, Perek Daled, pasuk Yud Beis. Na vanad tieh ba'aretz. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the face of the planet. You will not have a home. You will always be a stranger in a strange place. There was no greater punishment at the time of the Torah, at the very dawn of human history, than to be a stranger in a strange place, to be a wanderer on the face of the earth. Na vanad tieh ba'aretz. It's the first punishment recorded in the Torah. Can you imagine that? That was the punishment. Vayomer Cain el Hashem. What was Cain's response to God? Cain said to God, Gadol avoini minasai v'haya kol moitzi'i hargeni. Cain said, Hashem, give me any punishment you can think of, just don't give me that one. It is too great to bear. Anyone who meets me will kill me. Do you know how strangers were treated at the time of the Bible? They were killed. Their life was in mortal danger. Cain's life was in mortal danger simply because he was a nod ba'aretz. That is how strangers were treated at the time of the Torah. What about Avraham Avinu? Avraham Avinu came to Egypt with his wife. What happened? He was thrown into jail and his wife was kidnapped. That is how strangers were treated at the time of the Torah. What about the angels, the Malachim, who came to Sodom? And they were in the house of Lot. A mob gathered at Lot's door and said, give us those strangers, we would like to kill them, to destroy them. How dare you bring strangers into our city? Yaakov and Lavan How was Yaakov treated as a stranger in a country that he wasn't born in? He was treated as an outsider. He wanted to marry Rachel. Lavan gave him Leah. He says, how dare you do this to me? You made a promise that I can marry your daughter Rachel. Lo asa Cain bimkaimenu. That's not the way we do it in our place. And what could Yaakov do? Absolutely nothing. There was no recourse for a stranger. There was no protection for a stranger. If you were an outsider at the time of the Bible, you were out. You were finished. That is the lot of the stranger at the time of the Torah. So Moab, the nation of Moab, were they considered strangers at the time of the Torah? Absolutely. We have a quotation in scripture. It's in Devarim Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Daled and Pasuk Hey. Lo yovai Ammoni u'Moavi b'kahal Hashem. No Ammonite nor Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of God. None of their descendants, even the 10th generation, shall ever be admitted into the congregation of God. You listening to that? 10 generations. Because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt. They treated you like strangers, rejected you, marginalized you, mistreated you, so they do not deserve to belong to our community. They are them, we are us, and it's not Mark Twain. You'll tell me where it's from. Never the twain shall meet. And because they hired Bilam, the son of Beor, from Petor of Aram Naraim to curse you. Moab are outsiders. They're not our people. They are strangers. What was Ruse? Ruse was a Moabite. Ruse was from Moab. How would she have been treated or perceived at the time of the Torah, at the time of the Tanakh? As an outsider, as a danger, as one of that 10 generations who cannot be included in the Kahal Hashem, in the congregation of God. There is a chapter in Shoftim that talks about the Moabites. The chapter is in Shoftim Aleph, Judges 1, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Yud Beis, Psukim Yud Beis to Tesvav. The children of Israel continued to do that which displeased God, and God strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab. They were enemies. What happens when your enemy becomes stronger than you? He's a danger. He could kill you. He could destroy you. He could be victorious against you in battle. Why did Hashem do this? Because they had done that which displeased God. And Eglon gathered to him the children of Ammon and Amalek, and he went and struck against Israel and took possession of the city of the date palms. And the children of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, for 18 years. Eglon, the king of Moab, was not considered a sugar daddy. He wasn't somebody who was a friend of the Jews. He was somebody who was perceived as an enemy of the Jews. He was the epitome of the Moabites of his time, and every Jew considered Moabites and Moab to be the enemy. And the children of Israel cried out to God, and God raised up a savior for them, Ehud ben Gera, from the tribe of Binyamin, a man with a shriveled right hand. And the children of Israel sent him to give a gift to Eglon, the king of Moab. I'm not going to go over the story, but he killed Eglon, the king of Moab. Eglon, who was rather portly, had a dagger thrust into him, all the way into him, so that Ehud's hand went right into his innards. Quite a gruesome story. Moab was the enemy. Moab were strangers. Moab was the outsider. even though they were neighbors of the land of Israel, even though that perhaps we were related because Moab was descended from Lot, nevertheless, they treated us as strangers, and that's the way we treated them. Okay, so you're going to say that that was at a particular moment in history. Perhaps things had changed. Perhaps Ruse, Ruth the Moabite, was not considered an outsider because attitudes had changed at the time when she emerged. Let's have a look. When did the story of Ruth the Moabite actually take place in history? And how was Moab perceived in those days? So the Gemara in Baba Basra, Daf Tzadi Aleph, Omid Aleph, says as follows. Omar Rabba Barav Huna Omar Rav, Ivtzon ze Boaz. Who was Boaz? Boaz was Ruse's husband. He was the man who took care of Ruse and Naomi in this time of famine when they came to glean wheat in his field. Who was he? Boaz is not a name that is mentioned anywhere besides for the book of Ruse, besides for Megillas Ruse. Who was he? Says Rabba Barav Huna, one of the significant Talmudic sages. Based on tradition, we know that Boaz was none other than Ivtzon. Ivtzon was one of the shoftim, one of the judges of that period of Jewish history between the conquest of the land of Canaan and the building of the Beis Hamikdash, the Malchus Beis David, first the Malchus Shaul and the Malchus Beis David. There was a period of a few hundred years when the Mishkan was in Shiloh and in other places before the Beis Hamikdash was built, when we were ruled by a series of what is referred to in Jewish tradition as shoftim, as judges, and there are books of judges, shoftim Aleph and shoftim Beis. What does the Midrash say about Ivtzon, about Boaz? Vayikach Boaz es Rus, Amru oisa halayla sheba aleha meis. You know that Boaz married Ruse, took her as his wife, and on the very night that he had relations with her, he died. That night, which is recorded in Megillas Ruse, is the last night of his life. He was a very elderly man, and he died. Ruse went on to become pregnant and have children, and King David is descended from her. Vayeshvu sham ke'eser shonim. So we know that Ruse, in the beginning of Megillas Ruse, we know that Elimelech, who was Naomi's husband, lived in Moab for roughly 10 years. We know that Ivtzon, Boaz, was the leader for 7 years. Listen carefully, we need to work this out. I know that I'm not Mark Twain, by the way, I'm quite good with figures. Ivtzon died on the night that he had relations with Ruse. Boaz, Ivtzon is one and the same person. He was the ruler of the Jewish nation for 7 years. We know that Elimelech and his family lived in Moab for 10 years, which means for the final 3 years of whoever it was who preceded Ivtzon, Boaz, as the leader of the Jewish nation. Who was that person? Now we know that that was the era in which they lived. Who was that person? And what was their relationship with Moab? Yiftach. None other than Yiftach was the leader directly before Ivtzon, Boaz, who we know was the person who took Rus HaMoaviyah as his wife. During Yiftach's reign, the king of the Ammonites, the Melech of Ammon, claimed that Chevel HaGilad, a particular place, belonged to Ammon and Moab. It didn't belong to the Jewish nation. And that the Israelites had illegitimately occupied the land. By the way, sound familiar? Jews occupying land that belongs to them? In any event, He demanded, as a condition for peace, that the Israelites return the entire Gilad region. What did Yiftach do? Was he impressed? Did he agree? Did he say, Moab are good people, they're absolutely right, they have a claim on our land, let's make an arrangement with the United Nations, a partition? What did Yiftach do? Yiftach gave a political speech. The text of that speech is recorded in Melachim, in Shoftim Aleph, Perek Yud Aleph, and this was his argument. Vayomer lo Omar Yiftach, this is what Yiftach said. Israel did not take the land of Moab and the land of the children of Ammon, because when they came up from Egypt and Israel went through the wilderness up to the Red Sea, they came to a place called Kadesh. And Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, and they said, let me pass now through your land. What did the king of Edom respond, said Yiftach? The king of Edom didn't listen to them. And also, they sent a message to the king of Moab, and he too was unwilling. And Israel stayed in Kadesh. And then they went through the wilderness, and they went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab. And they came to the east of the land of Moab, and they encamped on the other side of Arnon. And they did not come within the border of Moab, for Arnon was the border of Moab. My friends, we have here evidence in Tanakh that the relationship at the time of Ruse Moabiyah between the Jewish nation and the kingdom of Moab was not one of great friendship and love. Yiftach, who was the leader before Boaz, had engaged in a very difficult interaction between his country and Moab. And as far as any Jew living in Eretz Yisrael was concerned, Moab was not just an outsider, they were the enemy. They were looking to claim land that wasn't theirs and to kill Jews who were innocent. That was the relationship between Moab and the Israelites at the time of Rus HaMoabiyah. Okay, so you're going to say, I mean, you're listening to me. By the way, I have to admire your patience. Thank you so much. You're listening to me and you're thinking to yourself, okay, so that was the relationship between two countries. But individuals can get on. After all, even if you are from Moab, doesn't mean that you should be hated in the country that is the enemy of your nation. What was the relationship between Jews and Ruse? Knowing that Ruse had married into a family that was, after all, one of the leading families of the Jewish nation at that time. Surely, merely because she had married one of the sons of Elimelech and was now living in Eretz Yisrael as the daughter-in-law of Naomi, she should be considered as a kind of quasi-Jew, a guest Jew, even if her origins were in Moab. Let me tell you that the Midrash is unequivocal about the way in which Elimelech and his family were perceived by the Jewish nation as a result of their self-imposed exile in Moab during the famine that occurred during their lifetime. By the way, Elimelech, Machlon and Chilion all died in Moab. One must assume that they were buried there. How was Elimelech perceived by the Jewish nation during the period in which he left Eretz Yisrael and moved to Moab so that he could avoid the famine that was causing such problems in the land of his birth, the land of his nation, Eretz Yisrael? This is a Medrash Rabbah in Ruse. Lama ne'enash Elimelech. The Medrash assumes that the death of Elimelech was a punishment for the fact that he had abandoned his nation. Lama ne'enash, why was he punished? Al yidei shehipil libon shel Yisrael aleihen, because he struck despair into the hearts of Israel. Levulyotin shayasharu b'medina, he ruled the country for nothing. V'ayu b'nei ha'medina sevurin alav, and the citizens were sure. V'omrim she'im yavoyu shnei batzoyres u'yochel esapekes ha'medina eseshonim mozoin. They knew that he was such a wealthy man that should the country suffer a famine, a lack of economic success, that he could sustain them through his wealth for 10 years, because that's how fabulously wealthy and well-resourced he was. Kivun shebos shnas batzoyres, but when the years of famine finally came, yotzesa loshivchosoi me'ayalas besidki v'kuposa beyoda, his maid went to the market stalls and her basket was in her hand. V'hayu b'nei ha'medina omrim, and the people of the land said, Zehu shehoyinu betuchim alav shem tovoi batzoyres yochel efarnes osona eseshonim. About this person we said that if there is a shortage, he could sustain us and supply us for 10 years? How is that possible? His maid is standing in the marketplace and her basket is in her hand. She's doing nothing for anyone. His representative, his messenger, is doing nothing to help anyone. This man is a miser. This man is wicked. We gave him every respect. We showed him the respect that we thought would result in him taking care of us in our hour of need, and he does nothing for us. Kach Elimelech haya migdolei hamedina mifarnasei hadoir. Elimelech was one of the great leaders of his district and one of the financial supporters, so-called, of his generation. However, keshebo shnei ra'ovain omar achshav kol Yisrael mesavavin pischi, but when the years of need came, he said, look, all the people of Israel are coming to bother me. They're knocking at my door and driving me crazy to help them. I can't be bothered for this. Zeh b'kupasei v'zeh b'kupasei. This one with his basket and that one with his container, trying to get me to support them. Amad uvarach loy mipneim. He imposed upon himself an exile and ran away from them so that he wouldn't have to support them. I prefer to be an anonymous person with all my wealth in a foreign country than to be in the country of my birth and help those with whom I grew up and who need my help and support. It's a Midrash. This is the Midrash. Ruse Rabbah. Hoda hu d'chsiv. Vayelech ish mi beis lechem Yehuda. This is the beginning of Ruse, when it says, and a man, this ish, this significant individual, left the land of Israel, abandoned his brethren, despite his leadership position, decided that he had nothing to give the people with whom he had grown up, and whom were his compatriots and fellow citizens, co-religionists. I have nothing to do with you. I don't want to help you. You're bothering me. Go away. And he left and went into exile, self-imposed exile, no doubt. He had plenty of wealth when he left and lived in Moav, the land of the enemy. That's Elimelech. So the fact that Ruse married into the family of Elimelech would have done her no good whatsoever. She was not going to be able to say, well, one second, I know I'm Moaviyah, I'm a Moabite, but come on, I'm one of you. I'm married into the family of Elimelech. Who? Elimelech? We hate him. He's the person who abandoned us. We put great hopes in him. But when it came to the crunch, he had nothing to offer us. We don't like him, and therefore we don't like you. And we certainly don't like you because you are a Moabite. So I think I've painted a pretty strong picture that Ruse HaMoabite was a despised, or should have been a despised figure in her lifetime. Both in terms of the fact that she was a stranger and in terms of the fact that she was from Moab. In addition to which she was married into a hated family. If anyone had no chance in Eretz Yisrael, it was Ruse HaMoabite. In which case, how is it possible that not only she is worthy of a book in her own right in Tanakh, but moreover, she is worthy of being the matriarch of the Davidic royal dynasty? What is going on here? What is it that Ruse did that managed to counteract all of these incredible impediments to her advancement as a woman of significance in Jewish history and in the Jewish faith? I want to take you to a bunch of psukim in Ruse that deal with Boaz's reaction to Ruse when he saw her for the first time. Ruse Perek Beis, Pasuk Gimel, Daled and Hey. Listen carefully. Vatelech vatovoi vatelaket basodeh. Ruse came and gleaned in a field, achari hakoitrim, behind the reapers. Vayiker mikreha chelkas hasodeh. Leboyaz asher mimishpachas Elimelech. And as luck would have it, guess what? She had no idea. She happened to glean wheat in a field that belonged to a man called Boaz, that as it happened was the family of Elimelech, her father-in-law. Vehine Boaz ba mi beis lechem. Now Boaz didn't regularly come to the field during the time of the harvest, but it happened to be that Boaz came home from Beis Lechem and he went out into the field to say hello to the people who were harvesting the produce. Vayomer Boaz. And Boaz said, Lemi hana'ara hazois. To whom does this girl belong? Quite a question. Vayan hanar. I'm going to get back to that question, by the way. It's a curious question. You have to agree. It's a rather strange question. Vayan hanar. So what did his worker respond, the lad? Hanitzov ala koitrim, the person who was supervising the harvesters. Vayoimar, and he said, Nara Moabite. Don't take any notice of her. She is a Moabite lady. A Moabite girl. Ha-shova im Naomi mistei Moab, who returned with Naomi from the fields of Moab. The Na'ar, the supervisor, the person who was taking care of the harvest, knew exactly who Ruse was, and as far as he was concerned, she was a Nova Nod Ba'aretz. She was like Cain. She was an outsider. Had he been from Sodom, he would have made every effort to ensure her immediate demise. But he lived in a cultured environment where laws and regulations prevented him from killing her. But nevertheless, when his boss questioned him as to who she was, his immediate response was, don't take any notice of her. She's a Nara Moabite. She's from that despised Moabite nation that we all hate and that are our enemies. What does Rashi say? Rashi has an interesting observation. And now we come back to the question that Boaz asked. Rashi says, V'chidarkoi shel Boaz lishol benoshim. Who was Boaz? Do you know who Boaz was? He was the greatest man of his generation. He was the holiest Jew of his generation. I know we just call him Boaz and he appears in Megillas Ruse. Boaz was, I wrote an article yesterday about Rabbi Kiva Eger. Rabbi Kiva Eger. He was Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He was the Chofetz Chaim. He was the Baal Shem Tov. Really? He came to his field and his first question was, Lemi Hanara Hazois? Who is this pretty girl? What's going on here? How is Boaz, the great Boaz, the leading spiritual example of his generation, asking a question about a woman who's harvesting in his field? By the way, it's not my question, it's Rashi's question. Rashi says, was it the habit of Boaz to ask questions about women? Elo, listen carefully. Divrei tznius v'chochma ra'ava. Rather because he saw her modest and wise behavior. Shetei shibolim likta. He was curious about her behavior because he observed that she would take 2 ears of wheat and 3 she wouldn't glean. Shloisha eina likta. She would only take 2. And she would glean those which were still standing while she was standing, and those which were lying on the ground while she was squatting down. Why? In order to avoid bending over, in order that she could behave in a modest fashion. Do you know what Ruse's behavior showed about her? That she was a very fine, kind, wonderful person. And he looks at this woman, and it doesn't make much sense. She doesn't look Jewish. She looks like a Moabite. And after all, if we're going to go by statistics, she must be wicked. And then he sees how she behaves. And he says, Lemi hanar hazois. How is it possible that all my preconceptions about Moabite women are wrong? Because this woman is behaving in the most glorious fashion. She's behaving as a woman should behave. She's behaving kindly, decently, appropriately. What is going on here? How is it possible that everything that I know, all my prejudices, are being disproved by this woman? By the way, Rashi is based on a medrash, another medrash in Ruse Rabbah. Whose girl is this? Lemi Hanara Azois. Didn't he recognize her? Perhaps he even knew who she was. Because he knew that Naomi had come back. He knew that Ruse had been married to one of his nephews. He knew who she was. But what he saw in her was completely confounded him in terms of what he expected. When he saw that she was pleasant and her demeanor was modest, he began to ask about her. All the women, says the Midrash, bent down to glean, but she squatted in such a way that her skirt wouldn't rise up. All the women raised their dresses to work, but she kept her dress down. All the women laughed and cavorted with the harvesters, but she was reserved and remained alone. This is the Midrash, it's not Rashi. Rashi's based on this Midrash. All the women gleaned between the sheaves in places where they shouldn't have taken any wheat. But she only gleaned, she only took the wheat that was meant for her, that should be gleaned by those to whom it was meant for. My friends, Ruse Hamoyavia confounded all stereotypes. She was someone who'd risen above her national characteristics, whatever they were in her day. She may have come from a nation that was an enemy of the Jews and whose behavior was totally inappropriate. but she had become one of the greatest and most righteous women of her day. Lemi Hanar Hazois, the greatest Jewish leader of his time, Boaz, Ivtzon, who lived at a time when his nation was in open conflict with Moab, looked at this Moabite woman and said, Lemi Hanara Hazois, how is this possible? How is it possible for somebody to be so special and come from the background that she has emerged from? I'm going to read you a piece from Josephus, an incredible piece from Antiquities chapter 5, 11. I felt compelled to give this account of Ruth, says Josephus, when he recalls the story of Ruse the Moabite. Why? To show the power and wise dispensations of God, who can raise up ordinary people to the most elevated dignity, as in this instance with King David emerging from such people, from Ruth the Moabite. My friends, Ruth's behavior is proof to us that no matter your origins, no matter your handicaps, no matter where you come from or your behavior, your disposition, no matter your preconceptions about others and how you expect other people to behave, nothing is predetermined in life. And people who are in the lowest possible situation, whose fortunes have been damaged and dented, someone like Ruth the Moabite, who was from the despised nation, who married into a despised family, who was a stranger in Nov and Nod Ba'oretz, managed to make such an impression on Boaz, on Ivtzon, that even at his elderly age, it was the last day of his life, he married her. And she conceived and became the matriarch of the greatest royal family of human history, the Davidic monarchy. That is the power of Megillas Ruse. There may be no Tumah and Tahara in the book of Ruse. There may be no Isur and no Heter in Megillas Ruse. But what we have is Kamos Chartoiv Legoimle Chasodim. What we have is the great reward that is recorded to anyone who excels in kindnesses, in behavior, in modesty, in rising up above anything that could hold them back and becoming greater than the sum of their parts. That is the story of Ruse. That is why we read about Ruse on Shavuot. Because on Shavuot, the festival on which we commemorate receiving the Torah, the Aseres HaDibros at Mount Sinai, the Sinai revelation, we record how a nation of slaves managed in just 7 weeks to be a nation that was worthy of receiving the Torah. We can rise above the mundane aspects, the handicaps of our personalities, to become great in and of ourselves and in our nation and receive the Torah. That is the message of Ruse, and that is why Ruse deserves her own book.